This nation was founded
by men of many nations and backgrounds.
It was founded on the principle.
That all men are created equal.
That all men are created equal. And that the rights of every man are diminished. When the rights of every man are threatened.
Considering the premise of this manuscript, the prisoners of war finally received an opportunity to live and operate, what would occur? To answer this question, history could hand us a plethora of examples and real-life outcomes. For example, German immigration throughout the history of the American nation represents one of the strongest cultural influences on the larger social makeup of the American nation.
German immigration began long before actual American sovereignty and actually maintains a representation of the original English settlement in Jamestown. The majority of Italian immigrants settled in most major cities, and their labor generally leaned towards unskilled factory work in their early years of immigration. Though some farm settlements of Italian immigration have gained a level of historic lore. Immigration laws of the early 20th century attempted to limit the number of Italian immigrants entering the country. Often referred to as new immigration, an influx in immigrants from Eastern and Southern Europe wrongfully encouraged federal immigration laws aimed to decrease the allowed number of immigrants from these regions. The history of Irish immigration began in large part during the middle of the 19th century. Most historians recognize this trend as a direct result of crop failures, commonly referred to as potato famine. Since the Irish economy placed a heavy necessity on potato crop, the failures resulted in widespread poverty, famine, and death. Large percentages of the entire Irish populace immigrated to the United States, making long-standing American citizens wary of that. Overarching stereotypes placed on Irish immigrants assume that they may deflate the idea of an American dream and comprise the first true American working class. Irish immigrants settled in some of the worst areas of the modern-day cities. For example, the Five Points district of New York City became home of an immense number of these immigrants. Asian American immigrants experienced a great deal of prejudice throughout American immigration history and were often unduly denied opportunity to join the American system and basic social structure. Chinese immigration made up the first wave of the Asian immigrants entering the continental United States. Initially for gold prospects on the West Coast, Chinese immigrants were eventually scorned and then even banned entirely. The Chinese Exclusion Act was the first legislation predicated on Asian racism and a long line of horrific affronts to the Asian American culture. Japanese American immigrants expressed additional racism, with Franklin Delano Roosevelt's signing an executive order allowing Japanese citizens to be interned to protect against suspected, wrongfully so, espionage or other subversive practices. Asian immigrants would not be given fair rights or equal protection in the history of immigration until after the mid-20th century. Latin American immigration is oftentimes reduced in scope to Mexican immigration due to the proximity of Mexico and America, as well as Mexico being a usual entry point for immigrants coming from South America. Historically, immigration from Mexico and other Latin countries to America was a common practice and respected as usual back and forth of individuals in search of best occupations. Often, these Mexican and other Latinos would enter America for seasonal work and then return home to their families. As time went on, these workers began to settle in American Southwest. They were formerly under Mexican control, simply opting to illegally immigrate.
After reading the brief overview of German, Italian, Irish, Latin, and Asian migration into America, I believe we all can agree hardships were experienced by each ethnic group, and based on common knowledge, I will refrain from including the Trail of Tears
and the inconceivable acts committed and remain today against the African immigrants who were abducted and oppressed. However, one truth I would like to point out: regardless of the ethnicity or country of origin, a certain level of difficulty came along with the experience. However, from the lenses of an historian, each ethnic group experienced a unique result. For example, German Americans worked together and established Germantown. Italian Americans united and created Little Italy. Irish Americans organized and indoctrinated St. Patrick's Day. Latin Americans fought and negotiated the Good Neighbor policy. Asian Americans strategized and developed Chinatown. Native Americans revolted and received in exchange reservations. And African Americans fought and were offered civil rights. However, the longevity of these outcomes have been greatly dependent on the effectiveness of unity and working as a collective body. Using African Americans as an example, what does history report? The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a great victory and occurrence for the African American population and society as a whole. However, due to Jim Crow, the bombing of Black Wall Street, and the slew of other atrocious acts, the true fruits of labor were dispersed to others. This concept may be a little murky for some, but follow the explanation. Hopefully, it will bring about a higher resolution. Segregation, slavery, Jim Crow, 1619 and 1954 and beyond, and Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896. Then we go to desegregation, Brown versus the Board of Education, 1954. Then we transition to integration, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Disassociation would be the next on the chart, War on Drugs or New Jim Crow, 1971. Then we trail back to segregation, gentrification, 1971 to the present. Of course, as anyone could imagine, there were quite a few lasting effects. In fact, without being facetious, someone could write a book about the lasting effects of such drastic trauma and transition. However, to name a few, a sharp decline in African American males serving as head of household, and a gradual shift in the African American community by way of transference of social dynamics. Between 1960 and 1985, female-headed families grew from 20.6% to 43.7% of all black families, compared to growth from 8.4% to 12% for white families. Recent estimates suggest that more than all of black families are headed by women. Ricketts, 1989. Resembling the occurrence of falling dominoes, one action leads to numerous reactions. The increase of African American women as head of the household is one of those reactions and outcomes, hence ultimately creating the independent woman phenomenon that spread throughout the United States and really caught fire in the 1990s. Crabs in a barrel mentality. Term: crab in a barrel mentality. Definition: the behavior of a certain demographic geared towards sabotaging other members of the same demographic. Concept: if a group of crabs are trapped in a barrel and one crab attempts to escape, the other crabs will make every attempt to pull the escaping crab back down.
Based on historical accounts, the psychological effects associated with severe trauma, ethnic genocide, self-harm, hopelessness, and etc., certain traits and behaviors remained over time, specifically since slavery. Perfect example, the feeble comparisons of the house Negro versus the field Negro, or simply expressed, light skin versus dark skin. Each label perpetuates the concept, the darker your complexion, the more dangerous you are considered or generalized. However, based on real-life experiences and numerous accounts from other male minorities, this concept is almost solely concerned amongst minorities. While the international impressions is less defined. If you are identified as black, you are black, and that is that. And that is regardless of what complexion a person is considered.
These occurrences, unfortunately, are a global factor at the present time, which naturally has manifested into what I like to define as confusion of self. And this confusion of self brings along additional factors to ponder. As a body, a large number of African Americans cannot trace back family lineage. Why is this important? The truth shall set you free. And since many individuals remain confined by the unknown, myself included, we are not privy to the origins, so we are collectively confused and separated from the direction of our future as a body. In addition, with a societal history of data information suppression, most of this nation has limited knowledge of the Moors prior to slavery, or at all. Once again, the truth shall set you free. Not only as it pertains to the Moors, but the ethnic groups who are native to this land, imported or migrated to this country.
All factors considered, the crabs in the barrel notion was generated from this confusion of self. Lastly, by imagining this particular mentality, including the indoctrination of race by Johann Blumenbach or the Willie Lynch syndrome, trauma and dysfunction handed down from slavery, and the systematic brainwashing of Jim Crow, the most unbiased person could easily conclude it all boils down to envy. Envy for attention, promotion, admiration, appreciation, and overall acceptance. The idea of identifying with something has a huge bearing on how people feel about themselves. In addition, persons who do not have a point of reference to identity or was robbed of their past have a difficult path ahead with an origin that has been wiped clean.
Individuals in this category may not know what or how to feel. In actuality, these individuals are prone and susceptible to persuasion and forced to adapt foreign indoctrination from others, especially when the influencers are fully aware of their own lineage and cognizant of the possible misfortunes of the ignorant. When referencing an ignorant individual, it is not referring to a lack of intelligence, but not being privy to the truth of a particular matter. And a person who fits this description may potentially be led anywhere. Hence, most of the content related to African Americans customarily begins with slavery in the U.S., school curriculum, Black History Month, media programming, and the list continues. Normally, the legendary stories of Mansa Musa, the affluent history of the Moors, and true evolution of humankind, and the vast wealth of the motherland are not told or celebrated. Of course, what oppressor or bully would want the oppressed to learn about how a man of color was, and still is, known as the wealthiest person on earth? Matter of fact, Mansa Musa disrupted the currency systems of various lands he visited. With that type of information, it would be difficult to inflict a mindset of poverty on anyone who could say they spawned from such a legacy. critics may say, not all black people came from Mr. Musa, so that may not be accurate. My reply would be, okay, what about the persons of Moorish descent? And if that reply doesn't suffice, how about the motherland? Which would actually include the critic as his or her place of origin as well.
The lapse in self-worth for the average African American has developed into a negative self-image. So, what could be the powerful effects of a negative self-image?
Self-doubt, self-pity, low self-esteem, regret, etc. Essentially, an individual or group failing to live and operate to their fullest potential. And if a person finds it difficult or impossible to feel good about themselves or their perceived position in society, how on God's green earth would anyone expect individuals with lower self-esteem to pull themselves up by the bootstraps or work in unity with others? Since this concern is much larger than anyone or group, the sense of working collaboratively with others, same ethnicity or not, is crucial. Otherwise, the necessity of crossing over with hopes of catering to a broader audience will not be as typically practiced. Why? Every culture should be celebrated for the positive influence and impact they have on society and the world. Therefore, the notion to cross over should not be as significant or widespread, or, as normally suggested, due to the societal advancements of every culture. It should be celebrated on general principle, without jeopardizing any cultural integrity.
I believe we all should look into the mirror of our souls and analyze our knowledge of self, and if known, the lineage whence we came, beginning with the reference of a disconnected community. Did the sectional content shed a spotlight on the impact of migration into the U.S.? How about crabs in a barrel mentality? Did the unique perspective introduce an alternate means of viewing black on black crime and violence?
What about the certain cultural impact attached to self-worth? And lastly, what about the observational factors related to how African Americans became divided and the why of not being united based on the lack of self-esteem?
In conclusion, how do you feel about the issues concerning the Black and African American community? I believe the subject matter, along with others, deserves a conscientious conversation.